Hey, everybody, this is Tom Sega with Duluth Pack, and this is the Duluth Pack podcast, Leader of the Pack. Our special leader today is Tereasa Surratt from Camp Wandawega in Wisconsin. This is going to be so much fun because I've delved into the history of your camp, Tereasa, and what a storied history you have to educate us on today. So, welcome.
Thank you you've got the best radio voice, I have to say, Tom. I think you're born for
Oh,
this. That's a great intro.
well, you know what? The only negative we've ever heard to this podcast is from our listeners is could Tom talk a little less and could we listen a little more to the people who are being interviewed today? So we want to hear a little less of my voice. But Teresa, let's just jump in a little bit because you got a great story and I don't want to run out of time. Tell us a little bit about your background, as in where did you grow up? What was your childhood like, and where did you go to school?
I'm going to try to keep this short because those three questions, I could ramble for the next 2 hours. I grew up in a little farm town called Beardstown, Illinois, population 4,000 back when I was there. And I was smack between soybeans and corn and a hog lot. So it's a pretty big leap from there to where I am now. I'm talking to you from my living room here in Chicago. We live about a mile and a half off the Magnificent Mile. So we split our time here between Chicago and Wandawega up in Wisconsin and Elkhorn, Wisconsin. But you gave me like three questions, and I think the second one was that it's the polar opposite of growing up how I did to where we are now. But it is a fun and unlikely path. So where do you want to start with that?
Well, let's tell us if it was so different, what was it like when you grew up? I mean, what did you do? And you're in a small little town that is so different than what you do today.
You know, it's funny. I was just thinking about this the other day. They say as you get older, you look back to your roots and your formative years growing up in grade school and in high school for me. And you don't realize the time, the things that you're exposed to and the things you experience and how they mark your trajectory for your life decades into the future. And so the more I reflect, the more I realize the opportunities that I had as a kid, one of five, growing up between the hog lots and the soybean fields, the things that I saw and I did really influenced what I do now as a creative director and an artist. So my dad was a mechanic and my mom was an artist. And I spent a lot of time with my siblings, but I spent a lot of time in sort of a solitary way to experience nature. And I think that's why, flash forwarding 40 years, we found Camp Wandawega to be so relaxing, and we wanted to share that with others. Subliminally, I think I was always going to find my way home in the way of nature, not necessarily my hometown, Beardstown, but it's a typical small Midwestern town, very little in the way of opportunity, but a lot in the way of community. A very small town, and I grew up 8 miles outside of this town, but I had a wonderful art teacher who was very encouraging and very inspiring. And so there wasn't a lot to do. We had horses. We had my dad, being a mechanic, had cars and motorcycles lining the lot around our house. So I learned how to drive a stick shift before I was 10, a motorcycle by the time I was 4. And, I joke about it now, but people from my generation and from small towns, we have a lot in common. I like to say I was raised with my 5 siblings like a feral cat. We were literally making things up. We'd leave in the morning, we'd take our dirt bikes out, and then we'd come home, right when it was dark, when we didn't have headlights and we couldn't see. So I have a little bit of that, I think, still in me, even though I've spent my entire professional career now traveling. Grateful to have traveled the world and in so many countries working on campaigns. And I think a lot about the things that I learned and the things I experienced as a kid that I want to share with my daughter who's 12 now, because she's a city kid, but she spends her weekends at Wandawega. I really want her to have the best of both worlds.
So I gotta ask the question because over your left shoulder is a motorcycle
Oh, yeah.
in your home. So what bike is that, and what's the connection to that bike?
That one. Well, my husband and I have an addiction to buying and collecting motorcycles. That one's a GB 500. It's a Honda. They made it from 89 to 91, and it's one of the slower bikes, believe it or not. It's fun. It's one that we've had for about 10 years, and you'll see that it's sitting in our dining room because the architect, we gave her a brief when she designed our house that we wanted to be able to park our cars and our bikes in the house with us, and so she designed it to where everything's sort of connected. And when you work with any sort of a creative who you're hiring, whether that's a designer or an architect, an illustrator, they give you you give them a brief. And our brief was, we don't want to change the way that we live and live in the confines of what a stereotypical home might be. We want to build a house and have you design a house for us that fits within our life and the life we want to live. And it's interesting. We were just hoping that she would take the project. Her name is Jeannie Gang. She's with Studio Gang Architects. Side note, just an incredible woman. She just got the bid for redesigning O'Hare Airport, and she's just on the cover of the Wall Street Journal for designing an incredible museum in New York. So we've been dear friends now 15 years later after she's designed this house for us. But going back to that brief, we didn't have two nickels to rub together, and we came to Jeannie before she was this architect and said, we don't have much of a budget, but we'll be your best clients ever because we know how to find talented people and then get out of their way. So she designed this house for us. It used to be a 1880s horse stable, and she sort of reimagined it for us. But part of that was this crazy notion of we want to be able to park our bikes in the dining room, and she did it. And so she built this house for us with this really unreasonable budget. We had a budget that was about the size of what you could buy a typical Chicago condo for. And she wasn't scared. She took the project, and it took 2 years of David and I living in his parents' basement while it was getting built, because we were saving every penny we could to just put doors on the house. And then when it was done with this tiny budget, she ended up getting this house got named Architectural Record Home of the Year. It got on the cover of Dwell, and she did something really innovative. And I think what I learned from that experience is that you have to find innovative, creative partners and then really trust them. And the way you can best support and collaborate with someone is by not micromanaging, by listening to them and letting them chase the dream that they have. And that applies to anytime I'm working with a vendor or a director or an architect or even a camp when we're hiring people. You just have to find what interests them and nurture that, because you'll get so much more out of people, whether you work with them or they work for you, if you just find what makes them happy and make opportunities to keep them happy. So in this case, Jeannie really wanted to build this crazy facade, and she did. And years later, we love it. But David and I joke that we're gonna, be here forever. I think that this is the last home we'll live in.
What a wonderful thing. And I had to ask because not everyone has a motorcycle in their home. So, but that you said some great things there, and I think some of them were great advice for our listeners who, whatever field they're in, is really nurturing people, find their strengths, and do whatever you can to make them happy with what they're doing, and they'll perform well. And I think that's just great advice that you gave there. So you were in advertising. So how the heck did you get into advertising? Where did you go to college, and what did I'm assuming you were in advertising, but tell us all about that and what your dream was with that career.
Well, when you're growing up in a farm town of 4,000 people, you don't really have the benefits of a guidance counselor who even knows how to articulate what someone in advertising might do. So all I knew at that time is that my mom was an artist and I liked to draw, and I was, I inherited her talent for that. I didn't know what the path would be. So I ended up going to a state school, SIU, which was university at the time had 32,000 students. So you got to imagine that was a gigantic city from where I was coming from, literally off the farm. It was like fell off the turnip truck, and here I am. And I didn't know. I went to school, and then I was blessed to having a couple of good professors that could see right away that I did not know where I was and what I wanted to do, and I didn't know how to get there. And I think that's what makes teachers and instructors sort of angels. They can see that in kids right away. And they could see that I felt like I didn't know what I should do next. And so they took me under their wing and then showed me, you can be an artist and you can make you can make a living out of it. It's called graphic design. It's called being a designer, and you can design logos and you can design ads, and all this was really foreign to me. But I learned over the course of those 4 years so many things. I think it's not uncommon to think about college as just a place to grow up. I was 17 when I moved out and I went to college, and I spent those years growing up and learning what the options were. So I took the field that my point of study was called visual communications at the time, which is the synonym for advertising. It would let you get a generalist degree that would let you work in marketing, the marketing field, or as a designer. And at the time I was in school, I was working 3 jobs. So I was a sign painter in the morning. I would, be at the sign shop at 7. And I was designing logos and hand lettering signs and gold leaf and bending neon, like the lost arts. That's another thing that you do that, as a kid, it sticks with you. And I think it still influences today my design, and the way that I design packaging or anything that I'm doing for Wandawega is influenced by those early days. But I think in school, I spent 4 years studying under a lot of people that had different disciplines in craft. So I worked at the sign shop, and then during the afternoons, I worked at the newspaper for, it was called the Southern Illinoisan. And I was learning how to set typography before it was all done, the computer. And I learned the craft of patience and letting and kerning and tracking. And again, lost arts of fonts, it made me fall in love with typography and look at it differently, which I still apply to aesthetics in history and heritage brands today. And then, that by the time I graduated, I had taken a job working as a marketing person at a local boat company. So I got to travel all over the US and, learn how to shoot out of, photographs, aerials out of a helicopter off of Miami, shooting these boats. And so I learned I think the art of photography and how to work fast from that. And then I knew that I wanted to move to the city. So I did that for a couple of years. And then I wanted to move to Chicago. As close as I got with St. Charles, Illinois. It wasn't quite the city, but it was close enough. As close that I'd ever been. I mean, again, Southern Illinois. And I worked for a very small boutique agency called The Core, and they did B2B marketing. So then I cut my teeth on direct mail and baby advertising, below the line work. And then from there, I went back to school because I knew that I wasn't going to get a job working in advertising properly, like Super Bowl commercials is all I could think about in my head. I'm like, I want to go shoot those. At the time, they were Pepsi commercials. They got all the attention. So I went to school and I went for 1 semester, and I went in with a little bit of an inferiority complex. I felt like everyone around me, these city kids, they know more. They went to better schools. So I worked 3 times as hard. I worked my day job, and they would go home and work till midnight, and they would get up and work my day job. And then these other kids were in school just full time. And I got 2 job offers before I finished my first semester from, it's crazy, two owners of 2 agencies, and they were doing huge global campaigns. And I remember thinking at the time, boy, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know that I don't have a pedigree, or, I didn't go to an Ivy League and I hadn't done this yet. But I think what I learned from that is what they could see in both cases is work ethic and commitment and passion. And that, as I hire today, I think about that more than anything. I see your face. I'm glad we're doing this live because you feel me, right? I mean, it's that. It's all about that.
You talk about that work ethic, and the second you said you grew up out in rural farm country and you're going to have chores to do and you are going to learn work ethic. It's crazy, but we have so many leaders, Tereasa, on this podcast that you find out that their background was growing up on farms, and holy cow, every one of those people talk about work ethic. That's where I learned my work ethic. And when you talk about it and you're so successful, and we don't want to go too long before we get into Wandawega here, but it hits a nerve with me because work ethic is where it's at. And so many people learn that in their very formative years of being a youth on a farm.
Yeah. And it's by example too. Like in my particular case, it was my dad for sure. The other thing, it's interesting, and it's fun to get to talk to you about this because a lot of folks that I work with in advertising, they already grew up in cities and they had an entirely different background. I hadn't met anybody else in advertising, that, especially a woman that rode a motorcycle to work, or that, would go home every Thanksgiving and Christmas to the farm. The other interesting thing is my dad was a mechanic, and he ran, it was farmland. And the thing about farmers is that they know how to do a little bit of everything by necessity. So they don't have the luxury of saying, I'm going to hire that out, because there's no one else to do it for you. They will lose their crop if they don't figure it out. And so I think that served me well to watch that as an example, to not take no for an answer, to become a MacGyver at a young age, and to learn by watching not just my dad, but his friends and everyone I grew up with. They fixed their own cars, they built their own houses. And so my brother and all my brother-in-laws, and again, one of five, they all do that. They're all still rural. And so when I apply that work ethic and just ingenuity, creative problem solving to what I do today, it's that there's a way to get anything done. It's about perspective and attitude. So there's a lot of gifts growing up in a small town. You may not have had the best schools or a lot of opportunity. There was only one school. But I think the things that I learned at a young age has really helped me develop. And it's helping me, as I'm a mom now of a 12-year-old, think about, how do I give these gifts of work ethic to her? How do I set an example for that? And that's everything. I hope that I am, because she's also spoiled rotten, because she gets to travel overseas a few times a year and do these things that I never dreamed of when I was a kid, when I was her age.
Oh my goodness, and that's a balancing act. It's a total balancing act that you have in front of you, but obviously you're very well grounded to understand that, what, I have to teach her that work ethic. I can't just let her go on these trips overseas and see all the greatness of hard work that mom and dad have done. That, hey, you know what, you're going to have to earn some things yourself. I applaud you for that even knowing that, because it's so easy to just spoil children.
It is. And you want to, isn't that the hardest thing? You want to give your kids what you didn't have. But part of the biggest gift that my dad and my mom gave me was not giving me much, right? So there was something about getting that paper route when I was 10 and painting bug shields on pickup trucks and grocery store windows, for the holidays, to buy my own, whatever I wanted for school, new clothes, that type of thing, that it taught me lessons that to this day I find still serve. I can't bring myself to walk into a Gucci store and buy anything new. I literally will look at a price tag and say, I could remodel a cabin for that, or I could apply that. And I come down from a place, knock on wood, that I have the luxury of being able to literally just hire a contractor and have it done, but I can't do it because it's not how I was raised. And that's what I want to teach Charlie more than anything, is that it is not the price tag of what you're wearing. It's not the brand name of the car that you're driving that matters. It's what matters and what gives you confidence is how you feel, regardless of, what you roll up in or what you're wearing. And I see too many kids now that do, I sort of base their sense of self-worth on what they drape themselves with. And I'm going to segue for a second into advertising for a minute, because I had the chance in my 25 years of working in advertising, of working on a couple really beautiful campaigns. And one of them was for Dove. A lot of folks know Dove because it's a bar soap. But over 15 years ago, we took that bar soap and launched it into body wash and lotion and everything from deodorant to hair care. But one of the campaigns that I'm most proud to have been part of is something called the Campaign for Real Beauty. And we created a campaign that really broke the stereotypes for how women are seen and portrayed in advertising. So what they used to call a plus size model is really just an everyday woman. And the thing that we're doing to our daughters, and didn't even realize it in the way that I grew up, is you only ever showed the size 4 supermodels. You never showed the women that look just like you. And it gave girls at a very young age inferiority complexes. So I think that as I think about the work that I've done, the legacy work that I've done in advertising, and the examples that I want to set for Charlie as a 12-year-old, is that their beauty is in every shape and size and form. And I take all of those years in advertising, I think about the lessons that I've learned and things that I bring back into the work that I do at Camp Wandawega. And I have to say, one fuels the other. It's become a virtuous cycle over these past couple decades, not just in the way that I tell stories for brands in advertising or the way that I host brands at Wandawega, but it makes me think differently about the messaging that I'm giving, the legacy that I'm leaving behind. And am I doing anything that matters to help push things forward for Charlie. I mean, I think about that all the time. We just hosted a kids camp last week for the Lake Effect, and it's the Carrie Woods Foundation, and it's hosting these inner city kids from Chicago that many of them have never even been out of the city, let alone been to a summer camp and rode a canoe. So we closed camp down for a week, and they came in, and it was the second years we've done it. We had to take a break during COVID, but it's incredible. And the more you do things that matter, I feel like the more you want to do things that matter. And so my husband and I have been looking for more opportunities to boost our artist in residence program, which is just donating cabins for artists to move in and make work. It's true. The starving artist thing is true. You need to support where you can. So I think letting Charlie see how we're running camp and using it as an opportunity and catalyst for young artists who are struggling, and inner city kids who couldn't, don't get vacations. I think that's the thing that I want to do more of. As I'm spent 25 years in advertising, and now I'm transitioning to working with brands directly, moving out of the corporate world, working through my agency. But I think as I'm making this shift now, so many more opportunities are coming to the forefront now, from brands that I work with to clients that I consult with, to how we use camp. And it's exciting, and it's fun. And I think it's opened my eyes to opportunities that I hadn't even considered before.
So let's fast forward a little bit here, Teresa, to Camp Wandawega. We're kind of talking about it in different ways as we go here, but please let's fast forward to, why did you and your husband buy this place, and what was your vision first getting in? And then let's just talk all the way through. Please educate us on the storied history of the camp.
I'm going to paraphrase this. The best way to learn about Camp Wandawega is through our podcast. So it's on our website, our Instagram feed, but it's a 6-part series that tell the very strange, very true story of Camp Wandawega. It's called Saints and Sinners. It's actually the same name as the book that we have on it. And the short version is that it was built in 1925 by a Chicago small town blue collar architect during Prohibition, because he wanted a getaway to a place to sell booze. And it was also, which was very common at the time, especially in remote areas like we are in Wisconsin, it was a brothel. And it has been well documented by the state of Wisconsin, and now we're on the National Register of Historic Places as well, talking about how common that was for places like ours, little resort, off the grid, one way in, one way out. And it's not to glamorize that lifestyle, or, selling illegal liquor, or God forbid, these women that didn't have other options at the time, but it is a part of the fabric of American history. And to not talk about it is the mistake, because there's so much tied into, like, what were the circumstances socially and in government that let that happen? And how can we learn from that now? So what we try to do at camp, I'm going to flash forward, 90 years. We try to embrace the history, but David and I bought camp almost 20 years ago. We bought it because David had been going there as a child from it was purchased by the Catholic Church in 1961 to use as a retirement facility for Latvian fathers. What happened was the Latvian fathers, these priests, would invite these refugee families, these Latvian families that had left their homes, and they came to camp to vacation, and 5 family members would share a single room. And they did it because they didn't have anything else. And so after many years, a whole childhood growing up, spending some time at Wandawega in the summers as a gift from these Latvian priests, David told the priests, if you ever, you want to sell this place, why don't you give me a call? Of course, he's a kid when he's saying this, but by the time he got old enough to actually buy it, and the priest was old enough to sell it, he called David and he said, "Are you serious?" He said this years ago. So David asked me, he said, "How do you feel about buying a camp?" And, you got to think about this. This is 20 years ago. This is before this trend, this wave started where everyone's buying a camp. You can't throw a stick and not hit one, or a glamping resort, or whatever they call them. And so I really thought he was crazy. And I'm like, what the hell are we going to do with a camp? 25 acres of fallen down buildings. He took me out there. It was like Blair Witch. It was missing windows and roofs, and raccoons were living in half the rooms. I'm like, where are we? This is a nightmare. But he was serious, and I could tell that it was his heart and his head was in it. And so I said, all right, well, let's do this. If we're going to do it, then we have to really commit to each other, to commit to this project and quickly pull it together the best we can. And so we did. And he said he wanted to get married there, which is even crazier because the place was literally falling in on itself. It was condemned. And I said, if we're going to do that, we just spend every minute and every dollar that we have for the next 8 months before we got married to make it, at least presentable to get married at, even if we just throw a tent in the field and lock all the doors. So that was, oh gosh, over 16 years, 17, 8, God, 19 and a half years ago. And what's happened is since then, we've still spent every free minute and dollar we have investing in this, what's become a labor of love and has grown in so many ways beyond what we could have ever have imagined, in the best ways. I think that when we bought it, we thought we just use it for friends and family, and it was going to be like a place to have, parties. And we certainly did a lot of that in the early days. But what happened next was entirely organic. And I get asked a lot, what the business plan was and what the strategy was, and how did you end up turning it into this, resort that's featured on the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the, best hotels in the world and travel and leisure and all these crazy titles that we don't deserve. And I always say the truth, which I'm, humbled by. Coming out of advertising, I feel like I should take full credit and say there was a plan. There was never a plan. All we ever did was keep moving forward. All we ever did is lean into the things that we love to do, try a lot of things, fail at most of them, and then keep trying. And we've had this freedom to be able to treat it like a little creative lab. And hey, I'd like to move a cabin. I'd like to move 5 more buildings, which we did. We just kept moving them and restoring them. And then I'd like to launch a product line. And now I want to do events. And so there's a fearlessness you have when you're a kid and you buy a big abandoned 25-acre resort. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. There's something about the naivety that gave us confidence that we would not have today. We would have dug into it too much. We were too risk adverse. We would have run the numbers. We would have thought about a business plan, and we wouldn't be where we are now.
So your original plan was more for just personal use, family use, and hey, we'll see what this does.
Yeah, 100%. We had no plan. We're just like, let's make it up. It sounds like fun. Let's make a dirt bike trail in the woods. And we did, for our 4-wheelers. We built a dirt bike trail. It was kind of crazy. We're like college kids just with a playland. And then what happened was we started to fix it up. And then when you fix it up, we're in the arts community. So there's a lot of artists that started to come, and photographers and filmmakers. And so it started to get a lot of awareness. And remember, this predates Instagram. So by the time Instagram hit and Facebook, we'd already been having these art camps and these immersives where people just came. It was a community. We never charged anyone, and everyone just cooked for each other and created art together. And so by the time Instagram came around, it caught on like wildfire. We just immediately out of the gate had a metric ton of content. And this is before people even knew what to name content. But when you, like any neighborhood, like a real estate developer will say, you follow the artist. Those are the innovators. They're the ones who are going to bring in culture and art and music. They're the ones who are going to take neighborhoods from scraps and then do something really interesting that brings people in. And when people come in, that's when investors come in. And investors, of course, ultimately start replacing it with like chain restaurants. But we, by sort of a parallel comparison, started very early on out of naivety, just doing the things that we loved, and it got attention. And once you get attention, people start offering you money then, which complicates things because they're like, hey, can I rent it for a wedding? And we're like, no, we don't rent. We don't know what we're doing. We're not a hotel. We don't have any background in this. But then we say, sure, because it's irresponsible not to, because at the end of the day, I could take that money and then I could buy another cabin, or I could renovate the cabin, or I could put that new well in. So we started doing that. And then that grew into, now we're doing creative retreats. And now we've got the global heads of Facebook and Instagram coming for retreats. And then you're hosting Shinola and Anthropology and Filson and Crate and Barrel, and all these brands keep coming at you. And when that happens, press comes, and then press begets press. And then all of a sudden you end up on these lists that say the greatest hotels. And then comes back that childhood, like, wow, don't they know that we don't know what we're doing? Don't they know that we don't have degrees in this? And, and there's something else I learned from my childhood, I guess, going back to it, is you've always got to remain humble. You've got to be very honest. And I think that has served us well in what we do and everything that we do. We have this thing called The Manifesto of Low Expectations. And we make everyone read it before we accept your reservation. And it says we're an 1/8 of a star on a 5-star scale, because we're fighting this press, this perfect picture perfect, press image that they like to write about and say that, we're glamping. I don't like that word glamping because it implies it's very glamorous, and we're not. We're camping. Everything about camp is from the 1920s. We have a couple new buildings, but we really try to lower expectations, because at the end of the day, I would much rather undersell and surprise someone than try to oversell and disappoint them. And so now apply that to everything. We host Michelin star chefs all the time at camp. They show up and they bring all their own tools because they know we don't have a single sharp knife in all of camp. And they know they're going to work with it on a stove that barely starts. And they enjoy the challenge, the high-low, because they're coming from their, fancy restaurants. And then they show up at camp and they're going to cook on a Weber grill. And they're going to bring their own things. And there's something challenging about that. But I think that everyone that comes to camp checks their ego at the gate, we like to say, because they take it down a few notches because no one is there to cater to you. It's very communal, just like it always has been.
So Tereasa, let's take a quick break. Can you let all of the listeners know where they can find you? Because I was all over your website. I was doing all this stuff. You have done some incredible things. You are extremely humble. That I will tell you, because from being on your website, doing some background, the background our people have done, you're very much downplaying all the hard work and energy and intelligence that went into all of this. And just being an entrepreneur, I'll agree with you that we learn a lot from our mistakes, and we probably learn more from our mistakes than our successes. But you're definitely very humble. Please let people know what your website is and all of your handles for all your social. So number one, they can start following you, but number two, they can learn and educate themselves on Camp Wandawega, because it is just so stinking different and so stinking cool. It just is.
Well, the shorthand is our Instagram is probably the quickest way to see what we're doing in real time. We post almost every day, and that's Camp Wandawega. We've got about 78,000 followers in that feed, which some might consider that a lot. But there's nothing more humbling than finding a TikToker or some 14-year-old working out of their living room that has like 200,000 followers. And you're like, you know what? I gotta remember that, it's not all about us ever. You could go to wandawega.com. That's our website, but I think the Instagram feed's the best, because if you hit the highlights at the top, it has a little bit of a tour, a little bit about who we are and what we do. But I think that what makes camp unique, going back to like what we were just saying a minute ago, you can't throw a stick and not hit another glamping resort or a summer camp bought by some hipsters in Brooklyn that are fixing it up, is that we are here as stewards, the current caretakers of this historic century-old property. We are not here to try to change the world and build some new model of a hotel. We're here to tell the stories of those who came before us, primarily from a historical perspective. So my husband David's on the board of directors for Illinois Landmarks, which is a preservation for buildings and landmarks that are getting torn down all across Illinois. He's also on the board for Frank Lloyd Wright Preservation Trust. And I'm on the board for the National Children's Museum in DC. And the thing about all three of those that they have in common is that we work towards a greater goal of telling other people's stories and create immersive experiences and preserving history. So I think that what we try to do is preserve the property, restore the property, research the property, and do the best we can as the current caretakers. God forbid our daughter Charlie, if she grows up and doesn't want to do this, I don't blame her, but we're trying to do the best we can to tell a story. And part of that storytelling is through books. So I don't talk about it a lot, but I have 3 books out. One of them, the very first one is called A Very Modest Cottage, and it was about moving a log cabin from my hometown, Southern Illinois, Beardstown, to Camp Wandawega and restoring it. And that one was published by Hearst under the Sterling, and it's out of print now, but it had a couple reprints, and it's still my favorite because it was my first. And then after that, the second book, I changed publishers at the time, and that was for Clarkson Potter, which is now part of Penguin, and that one's called Found, Free, and Flee, and that one's about Wandawega as well, and it's about the process of resurrecting this old property and finding collections and rooms and finding the stories within the objects that were left behind over all those decades. And that one went into its second printing pretty quickly, and because it got such incredible distribution, you can buy the books everywhere, but Anthropology picked that one up and it just sold out fast. And then the third one is actually a children's book, and it's called The Forever Tree, and it's about our tree house. And that one is Penguin Random House. And that one, again, tells the true story about these incredibly generous artist who came and built a memorial in this epic dying tree to my father, whose name is Tom. And so we've done a couple books that are self-published that are about the history of Wandawega, and those are on our website as well. But the reason I bring up the books is because they're intrinsically linked to what we try to do holistically as camp, is embrace the story and tell the story. And when you look at a lot of the other, again, glamping resorts and hotels, they're following trends. They're copying each other from Pinterest boards. Many of them have incredibly beautiful histories that they don't know how to tell the story for. So I think that that's a missed opportunity for all brands. And I'm not even talking about hospitality. Every brand that has history, many of them don't know that sometimes that's the thing that sets them apart the most. That's the thing that they should be sharing. That's the thing that people inherently connect with the most, more than a trend that's going to change, or a color palette, or in our case, bedrooms, walls painted a certain color. So yeah, that's why we're here. And that's, the older I get, the more they appreciate our history. And I will never stop digging for new bits that I find on eBay or stories from locals.
What's really cool is that you talked about this earlier, that not all the history was what would be considered perfect history, right? During Prohibition, a place for people to go and have alcohol illegally, and being a brothel and stuff. But it's part of your history. It's part of the history. Why would we want to ignore that? It doesn't mean that's what you are today, but that is part of the history. And you're 98 years old today. A lot of stuff happened in those 98 years. Yeah. And you found a way to tell that story and keep that a piece of what the ambiance of what you're doing is.
I mean, it's a true, and it's a good point. And I think that if you think about what you just said, you can apply it again to brands. I wish more brands were more honest about what they have to offer in their history. People are afraid. They're afraid to talk about anything that's not perfect. But the truth is, it's the complexities and the depth of the storytelling that makes brands or places like us layered. And sometimes it's not pretty, and it certainly is imperfect, but there's also a humility and there's an honesty in it. And I think the older I get, the more that I work on different types of brands, the more I tend to believe and respect and embrace the credibility that a brand has when they can be fully honest about their full history, inconvenient or not, ugly and all.
Absolutely. Oh, you summed that up really nice. And one of the things I would definitely like to have you talk about is, you mentioned a little bit of some of the brands that have had retreats there for their staffs. Can you mention again some of the companies that have come to your resort to get away from it all and have a retreat and have people get to know one another and put away these crazy things right here, these devices that we all live on and have a hard time putting down? And then another question would be, how many, for our listeners, if they wanted to get a hold of you, how many people can you host at one time at the camp?
I mean, I'm glad that you're asking about the types of brands that we host, because I think if you even step back farther than that, you think about this trend that we're seeing in the last, 5 years plus, of brands bringing and companies and corporations bringing their team offsite. It's exactly why you said, when we're so connected digitally, we're the most disconnected right now, because everything is done virtually. Everything is done on Zoom. Everything's done on your cell phone. So these companies are realizing the benefits of bringing people off the grid and doing things like canoe races, or, hiking together, get up early and bird watching. There's an effect that it has on the camaraderie in that team that carries with that team far beyond the days after they leave camp. It's not the same as having a holiday party in a bar. Once you go fishing with someone and you bond over rowing a canoe together, it's like you don't go back from that. It's a shared experience that's unique, and it's ultimately so memorable. And I think that we've been really blessed, honestly. We've had Studio Gang, Jeannie Gang brings her team out. We've had, the president of Facebook and Instagram bring teams in from New York and LA and Chicago. And we've had Trek Bikes and Shinola and Crate and Barrel and, oh my gosh, Jim Beam. It just goes on. It's surprising to me, and it's humbling to look at all these brands over the years that have come to camp. And the thing that that I think we're most grateful for is that when they show up, they're really researched. They've read the manifesto, low expectations. They know what to expect. And so they're warning their team, hey, there's no high maintenance people here. You're going to have to walk to the latrine, and, we're going to be roasting our, hot dogs over the campfire. So I think that I'm encouraged to see that it's not a trend that's going away. The more that, companies can get out of their risk adverse, I guess, attitudes and approaches and bring their teams offsite, the more they're seeing the benefits and the more we're seeing people come back. We're hosting Anthropology this summer after many, many years of hosting them. And it's been rewarding for them and for us. And what we do is we build these long-term relationships with them and friendships. And then sometimes they turn into clients, and more often than not, they just turn into friends. So that's something that David and I could never have predicted when we bought this old camp. But the camp has become a catalyst and opened so many doors for things that we get to do now that we never imagined we get to do.
That's really cool. That has to be fun if you're there to watch people have to be put down the devices and actually have a conversation face to face. Imagine that.
I know. It's the old analogy about the campfire. I mean, in so many of those corporate counseling and workshops, they talk about when they, host them inside agencies, they talk about the campfire effect and how you share and how it's a circular sort of conversation. And it's a virtuous cycle of sharing. When you're sharing a beer or you're sitting in front of a campfire, it's an immersive shared experience. And so when you get to take that sort of method of building teamwork, and then you take that into a physical environment of a campfire, everything that's shared, if there is very intimate, and it becomes so memorable. And the relationships that form, the bonds that are made, it's not just about, we get everything from weddings to reunions to, again, corporate retreats that come out, but everyone takes away something different. But with the shared experience, they come back with a different perspective. They look at things different. They look at each other differently. They look at their workload different. They look at opportunities within, their clients differently. So I think that it's been effective. And I think that's why the offsites aren't going anywhere anytime soon.
That is awesome. And how many people can you host at a time?
That's a little bit of a trick question. I guess you measure it. David and I like to say, well, how many butts in beds? If you were to do every butt in every bed, meaning a double bed, 2 people, then, we can, I think it's up to 85, but I would say comfortably, we try to keep it at 65, and then you have your day trippers. So like if you're doing an offsite, or you could have 150 people come for the day, but maybe 65 are staying there, and then in local places too. So we can expand and contract that. And also, it's about how many people are comfortable sleeping in a Boy Scout tent versus, a geodome versus an A-frame. We have a lot of different types of accommodations at camp. And as much as we like to believe that everyone's low maintenance, the truth is you always want to give people options, because there's always going to be a handful of people that are, they want better sheets and air conditioning. So we have a few of those places at camp.
Well, you know what? You can hit them all. And folks, you got to go to the website, the Instagram. It's Camp Wandawega in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. It's super cool. You have to go to the website. I don't have the right words to say how cool you've done on this, but in the process of making, Tereasa, this so cool, let's talk about some of the hurdles that you had to jump through or jump over as you've gone from, hey, this was going to be a family place, to now this is a full-fledged business.
Yeah, you know what? It's going to be something that I'm sure a lot of the business owners that you talk to will say the same thing. Staffing is always the biggest hurdle. Finding people that, understand and really embrace your mission, and then are available, because camp life is hard. It's a lot of hard work. It is not glamorous. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles, is that you get people that are very passionate about it, but they have to have the ability to sustain. They've got to have a degree of to endure, what it's like to go from high season craziness back to a low season when we're in repair mode. I think that we've learned a lot of lessons over the years, going back to what we started with. Find out what people are passionate about, and then nurture that. People don't take jobs for money a lot of the time. They take it because they want to feel like they're doing something that matters, whether that's preserving history. It could be restoring the property. It could be hosting other people, because they're sort of a caregiver, whatever that is. I think that you have to find it and find it early and nurture that. So I think that's been a hurdle, but I think that there's been so many other challenges you can imagine, everything from you can never have enough insurance when you own a summer camp. I tell you that, never. There's so many ways that people have fun / try to kill themselves at camp on accident. There's a reason that we've got like a 17-page liability release. It's like, people that they like to say it's like snowboarding. You can give someone a snowboard and give them a double black. It doesn't mean that you're going to control what happens when they jump down, right? So apply that to a rope swing, or apply it to hiking trails, apply it to, anything you can imagine, trying to swim at 2:00 in the morning after too many beers. So we try to protect people from themselves. And we've had a lot of learning experiences around the best ways to do that. I think that a lot of the lessons that we've learned over the years is that it goes back to, I keep referencing this manifesto, Low Expectations, is that we've learned how to be humble and be vulnerable and be honest, because we found that the more honest you can be with people, the more forgiving they're going to be. Especially when it sounds weird to say we're trying to combat the press, because we love the press and they're our life's blood, but they overpromise when they say that you're the best, you're the best hotels in the world. And we've been literally on these lists in Travel and Leisure that say this. And we're like, oh my Lord, people are going to come now and be so disappointed. So the lessons that we learn is we really try to drive home how rough it's going to be and how rustic it's going to be. So, and we learned that the hard way by not, sharing that message early on enough. And so now we appropriately warn people. And then the folks we end up having at camp are lovely. And they show up expecting to like pee in the woods like a bear. They don't even know they have plumbing. And then they're so excited when they see they have like a flushing toilet. We're like, okay, great. Now we're starting from a good place. Now you're really going to be happy when you see the canteen, or you see that we have, rowboats, insert any amenity. They'll be thrilled to have it when they know you have the basics.
Biggest successes. If you could, Tereasa, say, hey, this one was just a huge success for us, whether it was planned or unplanned. What was your biggest success? And then what are some of the other successes that you saw along the way through all your hard work?
It's funny. It's like, I guess it depends on your definition of success. I mean, personally, I feel like I measure success with a different measuring stick than most do. Success for me is, did it make impact? Did it build legacy? Did it create an environment for kids? So it's what I referenced earlier, things like this kids camp that we just did for these inner city kids. Like, that's a success. It's small and it may only be 20 kids, but those 20 kids are going to learn something and take something with them that we don't even know how it's going to manifest 20 years from now. So that's how I measure success. And more I try to find opportunities to do that. I think if you were to ask most folks, they would say that, we've ended up on Fedora's best hotels in the world alongside Shinola Hotel in Detroit, or that we've been on, the best of list for everything from Condé Nast to Travel and Leisure, that we've been in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. That's press, but success for us is, it feels like still being open, keeping this place alive almost 100 years later. That defies all odds. Restoring this place, getting to, get on an episode by Chip and Joe Gaines for Magnolia Network, having them come all the way up to Elkhorn, Wisconsin, spend 4 days with us. That feels like success because there's a certain validation in it. And what I love about that episode is that there's their audience are very DIY, as we know. And so the folks that they share that episode with on the network and Discovery Plus, they're people just like us who start with just a little bit of a dream, that maybe don't have a big budget, that want to see other examples of other people building something from nothing, filling it with thrift store finds, and then finding themselves on these crazy best of lists. Success for me feels like inspiring other people that they can do it too. I think, and by that definition, I feel like we're pretty successful.
So how did you pull that off, getting on the Magnolia Network? That's big time.
I know, it's fun. They just called us. I mean, I could make something up for you now and say that it was some brilliant marketing campaign after 25 years in advertising. I should be able to spend that. But the truth is, we get all kinds of calls from folks that are buying resorts or camps, and they say, how do I get featured in anything from Country Living to, Magnolia Network, or Airbnb did a feature campaign on us. And I say the same thing. Honestly, I don't know how to tell you to do it. All I can say is do something better than you thought you could. Put your heart and your soul into it. Never stop working. And if you do something unique enough and interesting enough and good enough, that people will find you. They'll come out of the woodwork to find you, and they will ask you to do things. And that's what's led to David and I getting the brand licensing deals that we're doing now. We're doing a bedding line, and we've got an enamelware line that just launched. We've got a bourbon that's coming out. We just launched a beer. All of these are with the national brands, and they just come to us and ask us to do this. And there is no one way. There's no easy button to push to say, okay, I want to have my own beer. We don't pay for this. They come to us to do it. And I think that there's no shortcut. It's taken us, 20 years to be an overnight success. You just have to do something different and better and unique, and then embrace your history and tell your story.
That is that advice you just gave right there. It took us 20 years to become an overnight success. I hope people hear that, because that's 20 years of grinding it out and a lot of unknowns along the way for any entrepreneur, for any small business, when they finally start seeing some real nice successes. Question, are you open year-round?
We are more limited in off season. So after October, when it gets really chilly, no one really wants to sleep at a Boy Scout tent. So we have the bunkhouse open, which is the old hotel. And then we've got the Lakeview Cabin, which is a 3-bedroom on the lake. And then we've got our Hill House. And then we'll still run our artisan residencies, but we take it down to about 20% of operations in an off season. And we really take advantage of slow season so we could rebuild. We say it's like the Golden Gate Bridge. You're painting it. Once you get done, you have to start over because it's time. Apply that to roofs for us and painting. It never ends. These old properties, it never ends.
You got to cut more wood for those fire pits so people can get to know one another around the fire pit, right?
I know, right? We do. We really do.
Holy cow. I'm sure but in 25 acres, you have wood there that's probably coming down in windstorms. So you know what? You're just recycling.
100%. Thank God my brother's an arborist. He brings up a team of tree men every year, and then they just drop 30 trees in our back acres. Unfortunately, Dutch elm and oak wilt and all kinds of things. But as they say, when a tree falls, you're giving another smaller tree the opportunity to take that space up in the sky. The canopy's opened up and it'll let something else grow. I think that applies to a lot of things, really, if you think about it, not just trees.
Absolutely. Tereasa, let's pivot a little bit here. So first of all, before we pivot, give everyone your website and give everyone your Instagram and all your social handles again, so people can go, and people, you need to go look at this. It is super cool.
It's Wandawega.com is our website, and our Instagram feed is Camp Wandawega. So from there, we have a Facebook, and but the thing is, we just populate directly from Instagram. So if you want to see what we're up to, see what the new news is, just hit our Instagram feed. And if you want to see our history and our product lines and our partners and retreats, then just go to the website at Wandawega.com.
Perfect. So our next segment, Tereasa, is called the Packed Questions segment. Just going to learn a little bit about you. What is your favorite movie?
Shawshank Redemption, because it's perspective. It never gets old. I don't care who you are. If you've seen that movie, you're lying if you say it doesn't make an impact on you. If you ever think you have problems, watch that movie, and it's like hitting a reset button. I love it.
If you look at the statistics, I think every single person ever has watched that movie.
Yeah, right. Well, there's a reason.
Yeah, exactly. You said you've traveled all over the world and you've been lucky enough to go with your family as well. Favorite place you have ever traveled?
Oh gosh, no, that's just too hard. I can't. It's so difficult to pick, to be honest. But and this is work. It's like two different answers. But the one for work, I really loved working in Hong Kong. I think that the offices there, as far as getting a different perspective, was pretty amazing. And then I think for a family trip, you know what, London never gets old. I opened up a museum in London last year, and I think that was a pretty incredible experience because I got to live there for a while. So that's still high on my list because it's easy to navigate. So those two right now are at the top of my list.
Just make sure you have comfortable shoes when you're in London, because you're going to walk a lot.
Yeah, you do.
Biggest fear?
There's too many to list. So I'm not even going to try, but I'll say this, whatever you fear the most, it's true. That's what you have to lean in on the most. Whatever it is you're most scared of, start your day with that, because it's the only way that you're going to grow.
I'm sorry, I'm not hanging out with spiders and bats first thing every morning.
But you do. If you do it, they'll be your friends.
Oh, I guess I'll just have to stay my fears.
That exposure.
And Teresa, what is the best piece of life advice that you have ever received?
Oh gosh. I think it wasn't a piece of advice, it was as much as an observation. The former head of Ogilvy, the agency that I spent all of my years at, Shelley Lazarus, said that you have infinite capacity for the things that you love, meaning, excuses are bull. If you love it and you want to do it, you will make the time to do it. So coming from that piece of inspiration, I feel the way that I activate that is to say, don't wait. You do it right now, whatever it is, do it right now, because the older you get, and I know that Tom, you probably feel this too, most people over 40 do, it goes fast, and it goes faster the older that you get, and you never want to look back and regret not trying something. It's not failing that you're scared of, it's not even trying. So that's whenever I need some inspiration, I go back to look at my Shelley quotes, and the infinite capacity thing is what gets me up at 3:30 every morning, because I'm like, I have time to do this, I want to do it, we're just going to get it done.
Wow, great advice, because we do. I mean, heck, I'm going to be 60 next year, and there's a lot of things that's like, oh, I'll put it on my list. There may not be that much list left, for crying out loud. But folks, this is not about me. This is all about Tereasa Surratt from Camp Wandawega. You have done such an unbelievable job with that. Folks, look it up. And if you have a business meeting or a retreat that you're looking to do, give it a try. This is so cool. And Tereasa, thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us. This was really the history, the heritage of what you have is crazy, and you are representing it into the future.
Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate your time. This has been really fun.
Appreciate you being here and educating us on your background and Camp Wandawega. Thanks so much. And folks, until next time, unplug from the indoors and recharge in the outdoors.